know about him. What's the one word that you'd use to describe this person?
Tragic, sad.
Tragic, sad, dark, depressed.
Yeah.
I'm not liable for any group or individual therapy that you need to have after this experience, okay? And because, you know, it's a pretty small park, it is more experiential, and I'm going to try to focus on that. So if you will, please join me. We're going to move out more into the driveway. Well, he died in 1953.
Oh, so I must remember it wrong.
Yeah. So he bought this property in 1937, 158 acres total. Now he built this house, actually had this house built. The barn though was already here. It comes from a previous owner. And then the next owner then built that brown barn, and that's where you came through. So taking a look at this, you can see we do have one structure that was original, and this is the one that he built and furnished, the 158 acres, costing $100,000.
In
1936. 37 is when he had it built, and they moved in. 6,500 square feet is what the house is.
6,500 square the interior, 6,500 square feet.
He got the Nobel Prize in 1936.
That's
And
right.
so maybe
He got
that's why he has money to build a
That's right.
fancy house.
That's right. The Nobel Prize was $40,000, and he sold his house in Georgia for $60,000. So combine that, and you have this. So let's talk about the Nobel Prize, and that tells us a lot why he came here. And in fact, in 1936, he was awarded the prize. He was in the hospital in Seattle, where he'd rented a home for a few months. The paparazzi just totally swarmed him at that time. He was a rock star back in those days. That's what I like to say, a real rock star. And he decided then he and his wife Carlotta, the third wife, needed to get out, to get away, that he no longer could live in this society with all these people demanding from him. They went to Oakland, where she was from, although they don't like to admit that. Went to Oakland. He got appendicitis and had an appendectomy there at Merritt Hospital. At that time, they had friends who lived in Lafayette. They stayed there a couple of days. They showed him this beautiful San Ramon Valley with the Las Trampas hills behind, and they fell in love. They fell in love with how remote it was, how isolated it was, oh yeah, how beautiful it was, how protected it was. All of these things are what they fell in love with. So if we look further at this Tao house, does anybody know about Taoism?
We are born in the Tao culture. Sorry.
We are from Taiwan.
But we cannot say a word. What's the real meaning of the Tao? Only thing we know.
Tao is
Tao
the
is
way.
the right way of life.
It's almost like
right way of life.
like the book of the Zhang. Tao means the way, the word. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
It does. And it has another component of harmony. Harmony with nature, unlike some other the right way of life, because a lot of religions say that they are the right way of life. But Taoism actually makes this component, has this component of harmony. Harmony that maybe is ongoing, harmony that is maybe infinite, harmony that is as much as the sky, as the brown of the earth, the blue and the brown coming together in this natural form of harmony, of peace, of tranquility, of prosperity, of health, and all these things. Now the O'Neills had studied a little bit about this, and also in 1936, 37, it was very popular to have something exotic. And what they chose to be exotic was what would help them, or what they thought would help them the most. Even if we take the location of the house here in the Las Trampas Hills, you notice that on three sides and below the ridge, it's tucked under, as if the hills are actually embracing the house, protecting O'Neill, his work, his wife, protecting the remoteness of the place. All of that comes into play with the Tao. Let's look further.
Feng Shui, you
Yes.
can explain to us.
Yes.
And then, of course, it's up to us to agree or not to agree, because it all depends on everyone's
That's
opinion.
true. Oh, okay, good. So we're going to come in here, and your first challenge as explorers, as followers, if you will, or as pilgrims, yes, is to find the front door. Come on over here.
Okay.
Oh, let's not step on this. Let's not step on that. It's a slug or snail or poop or something. What happened to the door? Again, evil spirits. Even this little stone here, you can see if an evil spirit gets past my gate, they come and go and die right there at that guardian stone is what we call it. Over here we have an elephant, and that elephant is in the aggressive stance with his trunk up, ready to protect us. Y'all gathered up around the former koi pond. They quickly discovered that the local raccoon enjoy that delicacy of koi very much, so they got rid of that. So there are certain aspects here, again, with the feng shui. Even something like this.
But this is all original.
This is all original, yeah. And I'll show you how that works too.
How about the turtle there?
Turtle?
Yeah, for good luck.
Good luck.
Turtle, good luck.
Yeah. But even looking at the yard,
long life.
yes, long life, prosperity.
And everyone for the fortune, like a Nobel Prize.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, he already had the Nobel Prize.
Right.
The only American playwright to be awarded the Nobel Prize.
Oh,
Yeah.
great.
He is
Playwright,
considered the father of American theater.
Ah, okay.
And widely by this, and even though very
Right.
dark and despondent and tragic and all that stuff, still the father of American theater, one of his contemporaries, Tennessee Williams, said, and he died for it. And we're going to see that too. So I like to point out when I talk about this, the Taoism, the Tao of the house, of Feng Shui, one reason why I'm doing that is I'm trying to pull myself away from that darkness. And I hope that I pull you a little bit away from it too and be able to be at peace with yourself when you leave here. Looking at the lawns, you can see how small that side is. My goodness, you think that they would want to make it proportionate, even. Well, then I would come right here through that gate. And you know, indeed, in an American house, you'd have the front gate, you'd have the front door, you'd have the stairs going up and throughout the house. Easy entry for those evil spirits. So that gate instead has a guardian stone in front of it. We have this idea of maybe the lawn over here, that is a quarter of the size of this. But yet, for some reason, when I stand in the middle where my daughter Teri is, I feel like it's balanced. Do you feel like it's balanced? Even when you stand here and you look out, I am standing in the middle. Even though you have the maze going through, there is a sense of balance in the order. O'Neill's life was totally in chaos for his entire life. And yet, here we have this sense of balance that was put here on purpose in order to make the place a nice, protective, maybe cocoon that he could then produce his greatest works, even after the Nobel Prize. We call this architecture Spanish hacienda with Chinese influences. That's what we call it. Cinder block from Livermore in the area. Basically, many of the things are here. We'll see some pictures of what it looked like, and some of the things weren't, honestly. We try to make it as close as possible, but not Disneyland. So we're going to go ahead and go in. This door is red, the Chinese color for happiness, I assume. The blue of the ceiling, the brown of the earth coming together in a harmony, this beautiful harmony. And did you notice you had to turn left, and then you turned right, and then you're going to have to squiggle all the way through, even the stairs, boom, boom, boom. No straight lines. And that's because evil travels in straight lines. I'll make sure we don't do that. You'll see the masks. And several of O'Neill's works did include masks, and also, of course, he incorporated Shakespearean and Greek.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. Greek and Shakespearean elements in his work, and we'll be able to see that. But the masks are from different areas. And these are not original. They are reproductions of what was here. Andy Warhol masks, actually.
Yeah,
So
those are from Japan.
those are,
Japanese.
yes, they are. Yes. And back over here, if you look at this wall here, on the left, Japanese, on the right, Chinese.
This is more Chinese.
And looking at the ones back here, we'll see African, probably Chinese. The demons are women who were just too jealous and had to be turned, had to be made right. And then finally, that's probably Native American after that. So we see these different masks, and more importantly, we see this picture. And what I'd like to do is to introduce you to the idea of how authentic this is here. So that we have these pictures. Life magazine came in, they took a whole bunch of pictures, they wrote an article, ready, good to go, early December 1941. And what happened in early December 1941 in America? Well, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Yes, and so that superseded everything. O'Neill's article was completely set aside, and they didn't ever publish it. But the blessing is that we have these pictures now that we can use to recreate this, to not guess at what was here. We know what was here. We'll go into rooms that have no furniture. It's because we don't know, and we don't want to make things up. One thing that I've learned with the Park Service, if you have to say it, you do. I don't know. We're allowed to say that. And we say that with how we recreate things. I'd like to give you a little bit of the history, how we acquired this. And as I mentioned, they moved in 1937. They moved out in 1943, sold the property to a family, the Carlsons. They were ranchers. They bought an additional 250 acres locally, call this area Corduroy Hills Ranch. After about 20 years, they then sold it to a development company. Well, the local neighbors all got together, filed an injunction in 1968. We're successful. Now this, Eugene O'Neill, originally it was an association, now it's a foundation. They bought the property. They bought 14 acres, and the rest was then given to or taken over by the East Bay Water District and turned into this too. So now we have the foundation owning it. In 1976, they gave it, deeded it to the Park Service. And since that time, we have been renovating it, returning it back to the way it was when the O'Neills had it in 1985. 9 years later, we started bringing visitors up and in our shuttle, and that's because it took 9 years to negotiate a contract with these homeowners down here, how many shuttles, how many people, how often during the day, what time during the day would be allowed to come up here. And that's why you guys hiking, thank you. You didn't have to drive the shuttle back and forth.
But is that a private road through the
It is.
whole?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Really? Wow.
When you go down here, Kuss Road is a private road. So that's some of the background. Today, the president of this foundation is going to be here and give a little tour. So that's why I'm saying we want to be kind of most of the way out of here for them to give the tour. And sometimes I would like to, like to listen to you too. But you know how that is when you want people to turn over for a repeating pattern on these. They're undulated, and it reminds me, again, evil traveling straight lines. And here they bump along. I don't know. The blue of the ceiling, the brown coming together in a stasis, in a harmony. The blue of the ocean coming together with Mount Diablo in a stasis of harmony again. Oh, did I mention the blue? Now, the Carlsons, I said, they're the ones that bought the property, and they made it to their liking. This was a bookcase right here. Carlotta Monterey, his third wife, who he lived here with, she had issues with her eyes and had to keep things dark. So they were particularly, they didn't want to have that huge light in their eyes, but the Carlsons did. They opened that up to be a picture window, and when the Park Service got it in 1976, we then returned it to its original That would have been a bookcase. There were 8,000 books in the house, and that would have been a part of it. Now you can see in the picture, I have one of the pictures over there for everyone to look at, or here too. Again, we are replicating this in a way that we hope it will be the same as it was when the O'Neills were here. Now the carpet, no, it's not original, but it's similar.
But the floor is original.
Yeah. But the couch, no, it's not original, but ordered from the catalog of that period. The Chinese room dividers, the screens, those were made for us in China. And the what we call Oriental cabinets, again, probably imported at some point, many years before the house was built, but very similar to what we see in the pictures. You know, one thing we do see in the pictures over there, that one in particular, is we see the O'Neills sitting and reading. And I gotta tell you, they did not have many guests. They were not interested in sharing this space with anyone else. This is intentionally remote and isolated. So this was more than the living room, probably more like a reading room.
Retreat.
A retreat, yeah, but retreat might imply other people coming, and that was not the case here. They liked their privacy. Remember all those paparazzi? They're camped out at the bottom of the hill. On purpose. So, Airbnb. Anybody do any Airbnb? You all stay with friends when you go out traveling? Are you ready to spend the night here? Sleepover?
Okay, no.
Let's go to the bedroom. Go to the guest room, if you will. It's a nice room, ready to go, en suite. You have your own bathroom. You have a back door out here, so you can go right out to the swimming pool in the afternoon if you like. Gene always went out there. Also a front door here, making it so you do not have to bother the master, Eugene O'Neill, at any time. You come, you do what you want, you go, that's it. There were a few people that did spend the night. One of them would have been Lillian Gish, Ingrid Bergman, John Ford, the director. But other than that, they had a few day visitors, if you will. So that is a big part of it. They had, there were 3 children involved. O'Neill had 3 children. The most frequent visitor that they had was his eldest son. His name was Eugene O'Neill Jr. He visited here 4 times in the span of 7 years. Most frequent visitor that they had here. So you can see. Now let's talk about, let's talk about his children, about some of his life. In his early years, he moved from place to place to place. His dad was an actor, a very successful actor. And then when he was a young man, all of his carousing and boozing and all going to whorehouses and all of that, he got a girl pregnant. And he married her, didn't tell his dad. Instead went to his dad and said, "Dad, I need a job." Remember, he was a successful actor. And so he said, "Oh, sure, we have a gold mining expedition going on in Honduras. Why don't you go there?" And he did. He never saw that baby. He never saw his son until his son was 12 years old. So you can see what kind of dad was he? Okay, that's what we have here. O'Neill then spent 3.5 years at sea. It was a very pivotal part of his life. He went to different places, including the port of New York, where he was homeless for a while. He had malaria and recovered, but he went all through Honduras, of course, Central America, South America, Malaysia, all of these areas. He said that when he was at sea, he was happiest. He felt the most at home. Can you imagine that swaying motion constantly, the storms, the lack of privacy, all of that, and yet that's where he felt so much at home. Well, he got tuberculosis, and so he had to go back to wherever his parents were at the time and recuperate. He went to a sanatorium, was there for 6 months, and got better, but he had to stop and examine his life. And at that point, having come from the acting family, he said, "I want to be an artist or nothing." He knew he wanted to write plays. "I want to be an artist or nothing." He had already attempted suicide one time. "I want to be an artist or nothing." So he was hell-bent to become that. Well, he had a second wife, Agnes Bolton. They had 2 kids, Shane and Una. Eugene O'Neill Jr. committed suicide at age 40. Shane committed suicide at age 50. But Una, now she was the special one. She was beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and kind of a Hollywood or a debutante of the area of Southern California. Bolton and O'Neill divorced when she was maybe 10 or so years old. But she did come here. She stayed here twice, I think when she was 12 and when she was 14. When she was 16, she said, "Dad, I want to go to Hollywood. I want to be an actress." And he said, "No way. If you do that, I'll disown you." Well, what did she do? She went to Hollywood to be an actress. He thought that she was just going to capitalize on his name. So indeed, she went there. She met the man of her dreams, the love of her life. He was a known socialist, horrible thing at the time. He was a womanizer. He had already been married 3 times to young women, and he was older. He was 54 years old. She was 18 when they got married.
Wow.
Told Eugene O'Neill, he kind of heard through the grapevine about it, and he said, "I disown you, and this time I mean it." Never talked to her again. Who was this raucous person? Charlie Chaplin. They were married. They had 8 children. They were married until Chaplin died at age 94. So it was a marriage that lasted. She was 18, he was 54, the same age as Eugene O'Neill. O'Neill never saw any of his 8 grandchildren. That's how determined he was to hold that grudge. And there's a nice picture of her. For the rest of the room, as I said, ensuite, rear door, front door, these murals behind me, unknown artist. It's called Mist of the Mountains, that's what we call it. And the Carlsons actually covered these up, covered them up completely. And that's great for us because then we could take that down and there they are. Right? Well, there we can actually see how this room was. Again, no furniture because we don't know what it looked like. We don't have the Life magazine photos of what would have been in this room.
That could be a bedroom?
I'm sorry?
Could be a bedroom?
Yes, it would be a bedroom.
It's
Yeah, bathrooms here.
Right.
Okay, let's go. Rosie's room, it's called that because of the piano. He named that piano Rosie. It was given to him by Carlotta Monterey, his 3rd wife, whom he built this place with, to remind him, just those days at sea were so enthralling to him that it reminded him of those days. That they would have these pianos and in the bars and the flop houses, taverns, wherever it was. Totally party time kind of atmosphere. So she bought that, and you know, every morning, he'd get up at 7 o'clock, he'd go to the piano, and he would play. I don't play, so I'm gonna... The whole town, village, if you will, of Danville would be woken up. It is so loud. It's incredibly loud. In fact, Ranger lore, stories that we tell, say that he woke up the entire San Ramon Valley. You can see a picture of him here at the piano. Now, he is smiling. That is a smile. It's like the only picture existing of him smiling.
Rare, right?
I'm sorry. Oh, by the way, did I mention he didn't play the piano? This is a player piano. It's a player piano. Yeah. So he didn't play the
Yeah,
piano.
you need to put
Yeah.
the coin down.
Yeah, and it recently broke when I was giving a tour.
Oh, no.
So like that. I ran around and unplugged the thing. So, you know, speaking of his day, starting at 7, play the piano, they were not meal eaters, they were snackers. So they'd have a bit of a snack for breakfast. He'd go up in his study, we're going to go up there too, about 1 o'clock, go down to the pool, take a hike, just kind of mosey for the day, except for at the end, when he worked just about 24/7 to finish some of the work that he started. Let's take a look at the pictures right here. This top picture is a picture of his father, James O'Neill Sr., if you will. There was an older son, Jamie, or James O'Neill Jr., that's what we say. Now you can see the father was an actor, one of the foremost 3 or 4 actors at his time. He came directly from Ireland. He was able to lose the Irish brogue that he brought with him. Now he was cast in the lead role of the Count of Monte Cristo. And you will see here some of the staging of it. It's quite complicated. James O'Neill Sr., or James O'Neill we often say, he was a man that felt he needed to support his family as he traveled, bounced around from place, from hotel to hotel to hotel. They had a family home, we're going to call it that, in New London, Connecticut, that they would stay at, rent, for 1 month a year. That was called their family home. So Eugene had this childhood of moving around. When he got old enough, they parked him in boarding schools. He did attend 1 semester at Princeton when he was asked to leave because he threw a rock at the chancellor, the president of the university, his office. That chancellor's name was Woodrow Wilson. Then going to be president. Now, James O'Neill was very frustrated. He went to work, he performed this, he earned enough money, $45,000 a year, a huge amount at the time, enough money to actually purchase the production and continue on as the lead too. They say that he performed over 6,000 times, that he never missed a performance, but he regretted this. He felt that his artistic talent was not at all explored or expanded. He kept doing the same thing over and over and dragging his family around while he was doing that. And so in the end, you see, Eugene O'Neill saw this and saw his father's despondency at having this situation. And that really influenced him. Remember that I'm going to be an artist or nothing? That he saw his father do that. Now there was something else going on at home. These people are Irish. They drink. Has anyone been to Ireland recently?
Yeah.
It's the
I don't
culture. I don't drink either. It's the culture. So he drank a quart of whiskey every day. And Jamie, the brother, drank a quart of, and Eugene drank, everybody drank a quart of whiskey. We're not going to say that was a problem because, well, back then, it's not something that was a problem. It's just a culture thing. But what was a problem is that while giving birth to Eugene O'Neill, the mom, it was a very difficult birth, and they gave the mom morphine, and she continued to be a morphine addict, and that was a very awful, awful thing for them at the time. Now we're kind of having an epidemic of heroin addiction among people who you'd never think, but back then there was very much a stigma attached to it. Now how O'Neill found out about this, well, he came home, he was 15, he came home from boarding school, his mom had attempted suicide, and he walked in on her with a hypodermic needle in her arm. This completely destroyed his faith in Christ and Catholicism, and from that time on, well, maybe he was able to write the works that he did because of this soul searching, because of that break of his soul. So that's a little bit about the family, and this continued on, and it affected O'Neill greatly to that he actually kind of replicated this. Yeah.
Is that the original video?
Yes. So the things you're seeing in the house, some of them are authentic, like the food dogs that you'll see it, and most of them are not. Like the books. They would fly off the shelves, right? Coming directly from the Dow House. There's one thing I'm forgetting. I'll remember it later. So, oh yes, this is the chi place for me. This room, if you expand the angles, would have been an octagon, which is a very important shape in Taoism. And I like to say, as I stand here, as I'm quiet, I see the walls, I'm encased in here. It was his favorite room, and maybe because it's a little bit like being cradled, about being embraced. Yeah. Okay, we're going to go upstairs. The food out 1941. By 1943, he had to leave the house for reasons around the World War, but he would sit at the radio and listen, and it's just horribly tragic to him. Whether or not he had an opinion on who was right or wrong, it was tragic. So let's take a look at the guardians that we have here. We have the female with her cub, and we have the male with the globe under his paw. Well, they're here to protect O'Neill. The bad spirits, they don't get up here. That's why. And this is a place that you want to stop everything. No one gets up there. But there's even a more forceful guardian up at the top, and I'd like you to meet her now. Beautiful view. Well, she had eye issues, so we know that some of the time there would have been a curtain up here like that. Where would the bed go? Well, we don't know because there's no pictures of it yet. So Carlotta Monterey, that was his third wife. I've mentioned the first wife with Eugene O'Neill Jr., and I mentioned the second wife, Agnes Bolton, who was a writer. But I'm going to tell you now about his editor, his guardian, his protector, his manager, all of that rolled into one to make it so that Eugene O'Neill could produce the genius of works that he produced after receiving the Nobel Prize for Literature. Carlotta Monterey, her real name was Hazel Thurgood. Who wants that kind of name? And at this time, the more exotic you could be, the better. And that's why she chose the name Carlotta Monterey. And that's why she had this persona, this beautiful persona, if you will. As a young woman, she was Miss California. She was a runner-up in the Miss America contest. She was an actress, a kind of B-grade actress, and that's actually how O'Neill met her. She was the understudy for one of his plays that was being produced for The Hairy Ape, is the name of the play. And indeed, the lead got sick, and so she was called up. She hadn't memorized her lines well enough and improvised. O'Neill was on the set. He went ballistic. He totally bawled her out at that time, saying, "How dare you change one single word of my work? Every word was there for a reason." And Monterey later on wrote in her diary, "I've never met such a rude man in all my life." Well, how did they get together? I mean, these are sparks flying and not happy sparks, right? And still passion. So how they got together is Eugene O'Neill went with his family they lived in Bermuda, by the way, and they went to Maine to go to a retreat. And after 3 weeks, the family returned home to Bermuda, and Eugene stayed there in order to get some business done. Well, guess who else was there? Carlotta Monterey. And so the same sparks of anger turned into sparks of love. And they then went and traveled different places, waiting for his divorce to become final, including Shanghai. But they went to Shanghai and stayed there quite a while, and then they went all over through Europe and stayed mostly in Paris, where they were married 1 month after his divorce became final. That was in 1929. And they stayed married for the rest of his life. But it doesn't, what I read is that he left, he was kicked out actually 3 different times. Like within the first 2 months of their marriage, she kicked him out. So they had still a lot of sparks going on. Again, she was his manager, his editor, his protector, his guardian, all of those things all rolled into one. They did travel quite extensively before they came here to the Dow House, and you'll see her, it's actually one of her gowns, one of her trunks, or today we say suitcases. These are Louis Vuitton. There are 18 of them. A girl's got to bring a few things with her. 18 of them, and they're stored in that little casita. I don't know if one of you asked me about the little house. That is what we call the trunk house, because it stores those 18 different trunks. Now, we do have a picture here of Blemmy. Blemmy was their Dalmatian that they bought in London, when they were in London. Blemmy was their beloved. Carlotta Monterey had a son by one of her prior marriages. She was married 4 times total. And of course, he had these 3 children by other wives. You know what they said about this, what Carlotta said about this guy? He was the only child that didn't disappoint them. So that was actually their fur baby, if you will. This is his bed.
He was buried down there.
That's right, you walked by his graveside.
We didn't see the grave, but we see
You
the
just walked by
direction.
it. Yeah. We can
The
always see the
pretty
gravesite.
Pretty close there.
It's right there, it's under the tree, and it has a little fence around it.
Maybe we can go back.
Yeah.
and take
Yeah, this is actually his bed, and Blemmy, that's what they called him. His real name was Silverdine Emblem O'Neill, so they called him Blemmy. Why not? And he was just so beloved. I like to show just a few pictures. Look, he's smiling.
That's great.
And the dog's smiling too. So just they had such a wonderful, and they had other dogs, beagles, Irish setter, little apsu. I don't know if you guys have dogs. When Blemmy died, of course, they were upset. And O'Neill wrote an epitaph, speaking from the dog to the masters, just like a play, just like a dialogue or a monologue from a play. And I thought I might read it to you. Shall I start from the top? Let me just read the last part. Let me just read the last part. One last word of farewell, dear master and mistress. Whenever you visit my grave, say to yourselves with regret, but also happiness in your hearts at the remembrance of my long, happy life with you. Here lies one who loved us and whom we loved. No matter how deep my sleep, I shall hear you, and not all the power of death can keep my spirit from wagging a grateful tail. Any questions? On that somber note, let's go see how. So what happened to the ceiling and the walls here?
White.
They're gray. Gray is in the fog of the ocean. And he uses that as a motif in many of his works. So yeah, let's talk about the furniture. This is actually the O'Neill bed. We call this an opium table. And he would sleep on it with a mattress about 4 inches high. He said it was the most comfortable bed he ever slept in. Can you imagine? You stumble on to nowhere. Let's go ahead and go now into his study. We'll be passing through his dressing area. You'll see a Chinese shirt, jacket, and we call this his writing jacket, W-R writing. No, sit. Well, that's enough of that. You got me right on. So you want me to kind of imitate it?
Sure.
Can somebody else read the directions, the stage directions? Teri, will you read me the stage? She says. Will you read me the stage directions? Yeah, italicized.
Teri can do it.
Okay.
Read that?
No, you're going to read this part in italics. Okay. So first of all, this is Tyrone. This is actually the dad.
He reaches out and pours
Oh,
a
no,
drink.
just a second, okay? Just a moment, and then I'll have you read it. So I'm going to read this part.
Oh.
You read this part, and I'm going to read this part. She's still moving around. God knows when she'll go to sleep. And then Edmund pleads tensely, "For Christ's sake, Papa, forget it."
He reaches out and pours a drink. Tyrone starts to protest, then gives it up. Edmund drinks. He puts down the glass. His expression changes. When he speaks, it is as if he were deliberately giving way to drunkenness, and seeking to hide behind the maudlin manner.
Yeah, she moves above and beyond us, a ghost hunting the past. And here we sit, pretending to forget the addiction, the sin, but straining our ears, listening for the slightest sound, hearing the fog drip from the eaves like the uneven tick of a rundown crazy clock, or like the dreary tears of a trollop spattering in a puddle of stale beer on a honky-tonk tabletop. And then he laughs with maudlin appreciation. One thing about O'Neill is that he gives tons of directions. So we have this, I think, almost like poetry dialogue, right? The words that the actors are saying, a dreary tear, maudlin appreciation, all of that becomes so enlivened, actually. But he gives the dialogue very poetically, very descriptively. He gives stage directions. He sets the bottle down. He gives directions to the actors on how to act to this, allowing very little interpretation. And then he has an emotional thread that he weaves through here, whether it be the use of the word maudlin, as in maudlin appreciation. Maudlin means sad and depressed and bored and all of that. We can see that through his works he's going to have this thread, as I said, kind of like things are in 4 parts, maybe like a symphony. Maybe having that chaos as the mom is rolling around, they're drinking all this stuff, but still there's order.
Deliberate order.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I know that's getting a little heavy, but you know, we're not talking about suicide. Okay, let me just put this back.
Is that from the long day's journey into night? I mean, that part we were
It
reading?
is. It is.
That seemed to be his most famous.
It is his most famous
Yeah.
poem. Yes, most commonly done. So I'm going to meet you down the stairs. It's a big deal of what we want to present to the public. Again, they had very, very few guests, so this room was not used much. You know, I know we have some literature that we set out that, you know, this is where they would entertain. Maybe they would have a few guests over, but it would be unusual. But this is a place that I like to encourage dialogue or discussion. Are you guys up for a little dialogue to talk about what we have here? I have some quotes. Do you want to take a seat? That's what often people do. We're just going to spend a couple of minutes. So his most famous quote, again from Long Day's Journey into Night, is the past is the present, isn't it? It's also the future. The past is the present, isn't it? It's also the future. One more time. The past is the present, isn't it? It's also the future. This is right at the end of Long Day's Journey at Night, and the mother says this as she has her wedding gown and is going through all of this remembrance in her morphine haze. The past is the present, isn't it? It's also the future. What is he meaning by that?
Life is a journey coming from the past and leading to the future. So the past is part of the journey.
It's a continuation of the life, the time.
If this is a continuation of life, is there any change? Can I change the future by changing the present or the past?
It's just a very, very sad statement that we were this way, we are this way, we will always be this way. It's like that, like no way to escape the fate or something.
But I think we should learn from the past, right? And then try to correct. But seems to me like the master is still going to his black hole. Never go out.
Again, is he telling us there's no change? That O'Neill is going to write plays that have the same characters over and over, showing us how awful life is, how awful we are. When I prepared for this, one quote or one observation that I read about was that O'Neill said that the present is only an illusion, just a story, an illusion, and that the only reality is death. Isn't that something we all share?
And he also strong believe that. Or he just try to express his feeling about the world.
No, I think he believed it. Very depressed, very dark, very despondent, very, what we'd say, alienated from society. Genius, though. The father of American theater. Because he could step outside the box. That he did, well, he changed. He changed all of our theater from being melodramatic, and that would be having exaggerated emotions, predictable plots, friendly themes to them, where instead he brought this chaos, this disorder. Our lives are horrible. We have addiction and prostitution and all these things. Not having a job, spending money lavishly. Here's another quote. Okay, let's see. I keep picking the real deep ones. It was a great mistake, my being born as a man. I would have been much better, I would have been much more successful as a seagull or a fish. What is success after all? I would have been more successful as a seagull or a fish. What would you be more successful as, other than a man?
Well, it's a different concept. If you're an animal and you can fly, you can swim anywhere, and you have your own way to go anywhere. And
But what about you personally? What would you want to be? Would you want to be antelope? A horse? A seagull?
I like to be a seagull.
I'd like to be on the ocean.
Yeah, he just loves the ocean. Yeah.
How about you? What would you rather be than a woman?
What?
What would you rather be than a woman? If he says, I'd rather be a seagull or a fish,
Yeah.
what would you rather be?
Never
If you
thought
could be
about it.
any animal or anything in the world.
Never thought about it.
Well, if a person all his life or her life is happy, he wouldn't, or she wouldn't think about to be another type of life. But since his life is totally different than average, like I said, darkness, and he's writing the play on the stage. You think that life just on the stage is all not feature, just imagination. It's not real.
Life is a play.
Life is like a play, and when the current, he saw so many times the current drop, and
That's the reality.
all the story is gone. He's thinking differently than everybody. We have a normal life. We born to be, and raised by good parents, and love, and with normal career. But we don't think of that kind of darkness. The reason I suggest come over here and say, let's look at it a different kind of life.
Mm-hmm.
And although his accomplishment, his writing, try to enlighten the world, people thinking,
Yeah.
but deep down, I don't want to be influence everybody saying the world is no good. The world is good.
And who else believes that the world is good, that life is good, that all in all we live in a place that is a good place? I'm very optimistic, as opposed to being pessimistic.
It really depends upon your attitude.
It really does. It does, yeah.
But he's from an actor, actress's family. He sees curtain opening up, closing, closing. He sees that all the time. So he really thinks life is a play. When the curtain closes, now it's the reality.
And he was able to step outside of it.
Yeah.
I like to say that he like slaps us upside the head with a reflection of the most evil part of our lives. And he did this again, the father of American theater. And that's why. Are you familiar with Vincent van Gogh's work?
Yeah.
With all the Starry Night and the sunflowers and all this. Well,
He's like that.
He's a little bit like that too. You can look at him with all these vibrant emotions going on, and some of it has really thick paint to it, and then there's thin, and all of these scenes that are from life, but are existential in nature, that don't really exist. They're just a piece of it. So maybe looking at this kind of work in a more visual way to say it's like Vincent van Gogh with the ear and the suicide attempts and all that crazy.
Yeah, he's
Very similar, yeah. Any questions? Well, let's finish up. At Red Lobster, there's always someone else that brings out the food, not the servers that brings out the
It's a
food.
fancy kitchen.
Fancy kitchen. Now, Carlson's did make some changes. Probably this is not the original, but I'll bet you that this has just been refinished in this original. I would suppose that. 1936, 1937-ish. Okay, let's go on in here. Now, this is a refrigerator, condenser with Freon, of course, on the top. See it in here? Not a nice box. This is an actual refrigerator. This would have been downstairs in the basement. This would have been downstairs in the basement, and the stove would have been here. You can see the backsplash for it and the fan up above too. Now, the reason why they left was because they couldn't get servants to work here. They didn't drive. They were too rich to drive, actually. Probably best to just let me handle it. They were too rich, they didn't drive. They needed their medications, they needed groceries from down the hill. Now their main guy, at any one time they would have 5 or 6 different servants. That would be a gardener, handyman, maid, cook, all of these that go along with it. Chauffeur, that was the most actually important one. And indeed their chauffeur, his name was Herbert Freeman. He was their bodyguard, chauffeur, kind of adopted son even, and he helped them out the most. He came with them from Georgia and lived here while the war started. And so most of the local folks joined the military in order to fight in the war, as did Herbert Freeman and all the men virtually in the area. The ladies went to work in the munitions factories right here in Richmond. This was a very booming war town, war supplies town, if you want, making that up, the words up. So you can see then that most of the people were gone. Before, they used to import help from France, from Japan, and they were kind of stuck here, unable to take care of themselves. They were older and getting more and more infirm, particularly he was. Carlotta tried to cook. You know how that goes. You buy a cookbook. That's going to help you cook, right?
No.
You gotta do it. But she did autograph one of these cookbooks. There's that one right there. Autograph it, kind of acting like she wrote it. Right? They both thought very well of themselves. So essentially, that's why they left in 1943. They then bounced around in different hotels, first the Bay Area, finally made it out to Boston. Again, this is what wealthy people do today, too. They live in hotels with full services, you know that. And he died in a hotel. Now, his final words are supposed to have been...
I know it. I born in a hotel and died in a hotel.
Died in a hotel, too. So those are his, supposedly, his last words.
So how did they wash their clothes and dry their clothes?
Yes, so that would have been done downstairs.
Oh.
Herbert Freeman was tasked with washing the dog, and he did not like the dog, so there are little stories about that too. The Carlsons added on much of the wing of the house that we're going to go into now, and that's where they did their laundry. Okay? All right.
Nice box.
This is the smallest visitor center in the National Park Service. I'm just saying that. I don't know. I don't think that's the case. There are at least one site I know that doesn't have it. But we are called the Four Parks, and that's because we are administrated by one superintendent. There's just one chief of interpretation with several rangers like myself. The Four Parks are Rosie the Riveter, Homefront, John Muir House, Port Chicago, and the Eugene O'Neill House. So those are our 4 parks that we have. The Eugene O'Neill Festival? Yeah.
I haven't been there.
What is the Port Chicago?
Port Chicago is about a munitions explosion during World War II. And African Americans were relegated to these duties, you know, that there were different assignments, jobs for different people.
Okay, we should go to
Races.
Port Chicago.
Okay. And that you have to really have a reservation for.
Yeah.
So the Eugene O'Neill Festival is held in September. It is put on by us and the foundation both. They do one play. This year it was Long Day's Journey to Night, his most acclaimed play, and it was just really interesting to see. The plays are long. The seating is general seating, so you could buy a ticket in July or August or so and come up and you get any seat. It's not like you buy it by the seat.
We were there only about 3 weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
Did you go there as a visitor?
I did. The only place I didn't go is Port Chicago.
Yeah, me too, yeah.
So they must have some.
That's in the end of the trail. You can hike over there.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there any good hiking place around Port Chicago?
No, it's
Well,
an army
hiking group.
base. It's an army base. You have to give your name and information in advance. They will do a mild background check on you. And so you don't get away from anything. You go in our van, you stay with the group. It's an army base, an active army base.
And the window is so clear, you didn't know there's a guard.
Yeah, someone's doing a really good
Oh,
job.
they're coming out at 10:30
Not
group.
to worry about it. Not to worry. We are perfectly on time. Just perfect.
That's for fundraising tour.
Yeah. I do like to point out one more thing here. This is our national park logo.
Yep.
I must be the only ranger in the whole park that points this out, but so many people see this and they just think, well, it's a logo, but each one of these symbols has a meaning to it. So the bison being our wildlife that we have, right? The sequoia tree being the trees and lichen and all the plants that we have. This is Mount Rainier, I believe, and that of course is geological, as well as our landscapes that we can see, and then the water, lakes, rivers, seashores, lake shores, canals, there's all different ones.
They should paint this blue.
But the actual shape of it, the arrowhead, has a meaning too. And that is our cultural heritage and our values, going from Eugene O'Neill House all the way to the Statue of Liberty. You can see that we have these parks, these areas, these sites to preserve and protect, and I like to add in there, present to the American public what we have, the jewels of our nation. So I hope that you were able to glean some information from me, and even maybe have a little bit of a connection to Eugene O'Neill, but not in a sad and despondent way. If you go here, this is actually more displays and more information for you if you would like. I'm going to open up the door. If you want to go out this door, you can go to the right. You'll go to the swimming pool. And you go to the left, you'll go back out from whence you came.